You know that feeling when you're absolutely at your wit's end? When you've tried everything, being nice, being patient, following the rules, and nothing works. Yeah, that's where I found myself last summer, thanks to my neighbor, Karen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should probably introduce myself first. I'm Alex. I've lived in this house for almost 7 years now. Bought it with money I saved working as a mechanical engineer. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I've put a lot of work into it. My garage is where I spend most of my free time. I do freelance engineering projects, fix things for neighbors, and work on my inventions. Some people have man caves with big TVs and recliners. I have my workshop, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm not what you'd call a confrontational person. My dad always taught me that good fences make good neighbors, and I've lived by that. Keep to yourself, be respectful, and expect the same in return. For 6 years, that philosophy worked perfectly. Then the Fosters moved out and sold their place to Karen. See, my driveway isn't just a convenience. It's my only access to my garage, which isn't just for my car. It's my livelihood. I need to get equipment in and out, sometimes on tight deadlines. And that's where the problem started. About 10 months ago, I saw a moving truck parked across the street. Workers were carrying furniture into the house opposite mine, and there she was. Karen Westfield, late 40s, designer sunglasses, standing in her new driveway, directing the movers with animated gestures like she was conducting an orchestra. Being the good neighbor I try to be, I crossed the street carrying a welcome basket I'd put together. "Hi there. I'm Alex from across the street. Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." Karen turned, took off her sunglasses, and gave me a quick once-over before putting on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, how sweet. "I'm Karen Westfield. Just moved from Oak Ridge Estates. Maybe you've heard of it? We outgrew our place there." She took the basket disinterestedly, barely glancing at its contents. "Thank you for this quaint little gesture. You know, the neighbors in my previous neighborhood were all executives and doctors. What do you do?" I was slightly taken aback by her tone, but maintained a friendly demeanor. "I'm a mechanical engineer. I do a lot of my work from home in my garage workshop." "Oh, how industrious," she said dismissively. Her attention quickly shifted as a moving truck attempted to navigate into her driveway. "Not like that. You're going to scratch the pavement," she shouted at the mover. "Honestly, it's impossible to find competent help these days." She turned back to me with a tight smile. "I should get back to this. These people need constant supervision or they'll break something valuable." Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs right then and there, but I chalked it up to moving stress. Everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt, right? 2 weeks later, I opened my front door, dressed for work with coffee in hand, and froze. A shiny white luxury SUV was parked directly across my driveway entrance, making it impossible for me to get my car out. The first time it happened, I figured it was an honest mistake. Maybe she had guests over who didn't know better. So I walked across to Karen's house and rang the doorbell. After a moment, Karen opened the door in workout clothes, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Good morning, Karen. Sorry to bother you, but there's a white SUV blocking my driveway, and I need to get to work." She sighed dramatically. "That's my car. I just had to run in for a minute to grab my protein shake after my jog. Is it really such a big deal?" "Well, I'm actually running late for a meeting, so—" Fine, she interrupted. "Give me a minute." She disappeared inside, leaving me standing at the door. Nearly 3 minutes later, she emerged with keys, walking slowly past me without apologizing. "You know, in my old neighborhood, people were much more accommodating with each other," she said, as she took her time getting in the SUV and moving it, deliberately slowly. I told myself, one-time thing, no need to make a big deal out of it. Everyone has off days, but it wasn't a one-time thing, and it wasn't an accident. Over the next few weeks, I found myself knocking on Karen's door with increasing frequency. Each time, her responses grew more dismissive. Each time, I felt my patience wearing thinner. It was just for a minute while I talked to the mail carrier. I was dropping off a package and couldn't find anywhere else to park. It's a public street, you know. I pay taxes too. You're being ridiculous, just go around. I'm not proud of what I eventually did, but after what happened next, I don't regret it either. This is the story of how I went from a conflict-avoiding engineer to the person who built a trap gate that crushed Karen's car, and why, sometimes, being pushed too far means pushing back harder. After the 5th time Karen blocked my driveway, I realized this wasn't going to resolve itself. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went through proper channels. First, I installed a no parking sign at the edge of my driveway, professionally made, clearly visible. Karen parked in front of it the very next day. Next, I tried leaving a polite note on her windshield. Please don't block driveway. Thanks, Alex. I found it crumpled on my front lawn that afternoon, so I started documenting everything. Dates, times, photos of her car blocking my access. I even set up a small weather-protected camera on my porch that had a view of the driveway entrance. Within 2 weeks, I had footage of 17 separate incidents. Armed with this evidence, I called the non-emergency police line. The officer who came out was sympathetic but not particularly helpful. Look, we can issue a ticket if we catch her in the act, but we can't station someone here waiting for it to happen, he explained. And technically, it's a civil matter unless there's an emergency and you can't get out. So I have to wait until there's an actual emergency before anyone will do anything, I asked. He shrugged. Call us if it happens again, and we'll try to send someone out. But honestly, neighbor disputes like this rarely get resolved through enforcement. Have you tried talking to her? I showed him my documentation of our conversations. He winced. Yeah, she seems difficult. Maybe try the homeowners association. We didn't have an HOA, which I'd always considered a blessing until that moment. I wasn't the only one having issues with Karen. Within her first 3 months in the neighborhood, she'd complained about Ron's dog barking. It didn't. Reported Mia's basketball hoop as an eyesore to the city. It was perfectly legal, and had a screaming match with the mailman about package placement. But I seemed to be her favorite target. One morning, about 4 months after she moved in, I had an important client meeting. A company from 2 states over was interested in my custom automation system, and I'd been preparing for weeks. I loaded my prototype and presentation materials into my car the night before, set my alarm early, and even laid out my clothes to save time. I opened my garage door at 6:30 a.m., coffee in hand, ready for the 2-hour drive. And there it was, Karen's SUV, directly blocking my exit, with nobody in it. I checked the time. My meeting was at 9:30, and I needed to arrive by 9 to set up. I had exactly enough time to make the drive with a small buffer for traffic. I immediately went across the street and pounded on Karen's door. No answer. I tried calling the number she'd reluctantly given me after the 3rd blocking incident, straight to voicemail. After 15 increasingly desperate minutes, I spotted her walking down the sidewalk in her jogging outfit, earbuds in, sipping from a smoothie cup. Karen, I shouted, trying to keep my voice level. You're blocking my driveway again, and I have an important meeting. I need you to move your car right now. She took her time removing one earbud. Good morning to you too, she said coolly. I'll move it when I'm finished with my cool-down walk. Is that all? No, that's not all, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. I have a meeting 2 hours away that starts at 9:30. If I don't leave in the next 10 minutes, I'll be late. This could be a career-changing opportunity for me. She glanced at her watch. Well, then you should have planned better, shouldn't you? I'll be done in about 20 minutes. Or you could call an Uber. She put her earbud back in and continued walking. I stood there, stunned. This wasn't just inconsiderate. It was deliberately malicious. I called the police again, explained the situation, and was told someone would come as soon as possible. 30 minutes later, no officer had arrived. Karen had gone inside her house and was ignoring my knocks. By the time she finally moved her car, almost an hour after I first asked, it was too late. I called the client, explained the situation as professionally as I could, and rescheduled. They were understanding but clearly disappointed. The rescheduled meeting went well enough, but I later learned they'd already signed with a competitor by then, who they'd met with immediately after my cancelled appointment. That contract would have been worth about $30,000 to me. All lost because Karen couldn't be bothered to park properly. That night, after a few hours of seething, I made a decision. This wasn't about convenience anymore. This was about protecting my livelihood. So I started researching. First, I looked into the legal aspects. I learned that while the street in front of my house was public property, my driveway was not. The entrance to my driveway, the part Karen kept blocking, was technically a curb cut, which is considered part of my property for access purposes. In fact, parking in front of a driveway is explicitly illegal in our city code, punishable by a fine of $150. I also discovered that as a property owner, I had the right to control access to my private driveway. This included the right to install a gate, provided it didn't extend into the public sidewalk when opened. Armed with this knowledge, I consulted a lawyer friend who confirmed my understanding, but cautioned me. Just make sure whatever you do is legal and well documented, he said. If you're going to install something, get the proper permits, post clear warnings, and notify adjacent property owners in writing. I spent the next 2 weeks designing. As an engineer, this was actually the fun part. I sketched various gate designs, researched materials, and calculated load requirements. The system I eventually settled on was elegant in its simplicity. It would be a hydraulic rising bollard system, essentially steel posts that could rise from the ground to block entry, commonly used in secure facilities, but mine would have some special features. The bollards would be connected to sensors that would detect when a vehicle was parked over them. If activated while a vehicle was in position, the bollards would rise only about 8 inches, not enough to flip a car or cause injury, but enough to trap the vehicle and potentially damage its undercarriage if the driver tried to force their way out. Most importantly, the system would include multiple safety features. A pressure sensor to prevent activation if a person was standing on it, an emergency override, and very clear warning signs. It would be controlled by a remote and a smartphone app, so I could operate it from inside the house. I obtained all the necessary permits from the city planning office. The clerk seemed amused, but impressed by my detailed plans. "Neighbour troubles?" she asked as she stamped the approval. "Something like that," I replied. The installation took 2 weekends. I hired a concrete contractor to help with the heavy work, but I did the electronics and hydraulics myself. Throughout the process, I could feel Karen watching from her window. Twice she came out to ask what I was doing, and twice I politely explained I was installing a security system for my driveway. She seemed skeptical but didn't push further. Once everything was installed, I distributed letters to all nearby homes explaining the new system. Each letter included photos of the installation, an explanation of how it worked, warnings about parking in front of my driveway, and my contact information in case of questions. I hand-delivered Karen's letter, making sure to explain the system in detail. "So it's like a gate?" she asked, frowning. "Yes, except it rises from the ground. The important thing to know is that you should never park in front of the driveway because the system could activate and damage your vehicle." She rolled her eyes. "This seems excessive, and probably against city code." I smiled and held up my permit. "Actually, it's fully approved and legal. I just wanted to make sure you understood the risks." "Whatever," she said, taking the letter and closing the door. I also installed 4 large warning signs, one on each side of the driveway entrance, one on the mailbox post, and one directly on the sidewalk where the system was installed. They read, "Warning. Automated rising. Bollard system, do not park or stand in front of driveway. Vehicle damage may occur, active at all times." For good measure, I painted bright yellow caution stripes on the curb and sidewalk around the installation. It was impossible to miss unless you were deliberately ignoring it. The system worked perfectly for almost 3 weeks. I could come and go freely, and most neighbors were curious but supportive once I explained the situation. Karen, meanwhile, had taken to parking elsewhere, though I often caught her glaring at my house as she walked by. Then came the incident. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in my workshop when I received an alert on my phone. Driveway obstruction detected. I checked the camera feed and saw Karen's SUV parked directly over the bollard system, blocking my driveway once again. The system was designed to alert me before activating, giving me a chance to check if there was a legitimate reason for the obstruction. Emergency vehicles, delivery trucks, etc. I watched for a few minutes. Karen emerged from her car, looked directly at one of the warning signs, smirked, and walked across the street to her house. I couldn't believe it. After all the warnings, documentation, and the fact that she'd avoided the spot for weeks, she was deliberately testing the system. I decided to wait 15 minutes before doing anything. Maybe she just needed to grab something quickly. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I called her number. No answer. I went across and knocked on her door. No response, though I could hear movement inside. I checked the camera again. Her car hadn't moved, and now it was preventing me from leaving for a dinner I had planned with friends. This was a deliberate challenge, and we both knew it. I sent her one final text. Your car is blocking my driveway and over the bollard system. Please move it immediately to avoid damage. No response. Finally, after an hour of waiting, I made the decision. I opened the app and, after a final check to ensure no one was near the vehicle, activated the system. The hydraulics hummed to life. The bollards rose slowly from the ground exactly as designed, lifting Karen's SUV about 8 inches off the ground. The vehicle was now effectively trapped, not damaged, but unable to move without risking damage to its undercarriage. Almost immediately, I heard Karen's front door slam. She came storming across the street, face red with fury. "What have you done to my car?" she screamed. "Exactly what I warned you would happen," I said calmly, holding up my phone with the text I'd sent her. The system activated after multiple warnings. "Lower it right now," she demanded. "I'll lower it once you agree to never park there again, and to sign a statement acknowledging you understood the warnings and parked there anyway." "This is illegal. I'm calling the police," she shouted, pulling out her phone. "Good idea," I agreed. I was about to do the same. They can document everything. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, Karen was still fuming, alternating between demands and threats. The 2 officers, one of whom was the same one who had responded to my original complaints, surveyed the scene with barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am, did you park in front of this driveway?" the officer asked Karen. "That's not the point. Look what his contraption did to my car." "Actually, that is precisely the point," the officer replied. "There are multiple warning signs clearly posted, and parking in front of a driveway is illegal regardless of any installed systems. But he can't just build a trap for cars. That's malicious. I want him arrested for destruction of property." The second officer had been examining the bollard system and my documentation. "Sir, do you have permits for this installation?" I handed over my folder containing all the permits, neighbor notifications, and photos documenting Karen's history of blocking my driveway. After reviewing them, the officer nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. This is a legal installation with proper permits and safety features." "So you're not going to do anything?" Karen was incredulous. "Ma'am, we're issuing you a citation for illegal parking. As for the vehicle situation, that's a civil matter. But based on these documented warnings and your decision to park there anyway, I don't think you'd have much of a case." Karen looked like she might explode. "I will sue you into oblivion," she shouted at me before turning back to the officers. "And I'll file a complaint against both of you for failing to protect my property." "That's your right," the first officer said calmly. "Now, how do we resolve the current situation?" I stepped forward. "I'm willing to lower the system immediately if Ms. Westfield agrees to sign a statement acknowledging she parked there despite warnings and won't do so again." "I will sign nothing," Karen declared. The standoff lasted another 30 minutes. Eventually, with the officer's persuasion and the growing crowd of neighbors watching, Karen grudgingly signed a handwritten statement one of the officers prepared. I activated the system to retract the bollards. As Karen's SUV settled back to the ground, there was an ominous scraping sound. When she started the engine and pulled away, we could all see the damage to her undercarriage. Nothing catastrophic, but definitely requiring costly repairs. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," were her parting words as she drove off, her car making concerning noises. She did sue me, of course. The lawsuit claimed $18,000 in damages to her vehicle, plus emotional distress. But her case fell apart during the first hearing when my lawyer presented the evidence. The history of documented incidents, the police reports, the proper permits, the multiple warnings, and finally, the signed statement acknowledging she had parked there despite knowing the risks. The judge was unimpressed with Karen's claims. "Ms. Westfield, let me understand this correctly. You knowingly parked in an illegal spot, ignored multiple verbal and written warnings, received a text alert while your vehicle was blocking the driveway, and still took no action for over an hour. He shouldn't be allowed to have that weapon on his property," she protested. "The defendant has all proper permits for what the city has classified as a security system, not a weapon," the judge noted. "And he made every reasonable effort to warn you of the consequences. This court finds in favor of the defendant." Not only did Karen lose her lawsuit, but the judge also ordered her to pay my legal fees. The aftermath was surprisingly peaceful. Karen avoided me entirely for about 2 months. Then, abruptly, she put her house on the market. I later heard from other neighbors that she told potential buyers she was moving to a more upscale neighborhood with civilized people. Before she moved out, there was one final encounter. I was working in my front yard when she pulled into her driveway. Instead of hurrying inside, as had become her custom, she paused. "You know, you could have just been more patient," she said. "Everyone makes mistakes." I straightened up from my gardening. "You're right. Everyone does make mistakes. Repeatedly blocking someone's driveway after being asked not to isn't a mistake, though. It's a choice." She didn't respond, just gave me one last disapproving look before walking into her house. The new family that moved in, a young couple with twin toddlers, were delightful. At our first meeting, the husband noticed my bollard system and laughed. "The realtor told us about the driveway incident. Don't worry, we promise to be careful where we park." I've kept the system installed, though I've never had to use it again. It's become something of a neighborhood legend, and occasionally people driving through will slow down to look at it. Some neighbors even jokingly ask if I could design similar systems for their own minor annoyances. Barking dogs, leaf-blowing neighbors, teenagers playing music too loud. I always decline with a smile. Trust me, it's not worth the trouble. But for me, it was worth it. Because sometimes, when someone repeatedly shows you who they are and what they think of your boundaries, the only language they understand is consequences. I still think of myself as a non-confrontational person. I'd still rather solve problems through calm discussion and compromise. But thanks to Karen, I've learned an important lesson. Being non-confrontational doesn't mean being a doormat. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even if that means building a trap gate that crushes someone's car. Well, traps it, anyway. The crushing was mostly Karen's doing when she tried to drive off before I fully lowered the bollards. But that doesn't make for as catchy a title, does it?